I was shocked to learn that nearly 70% of the average American diet is ultra-processed food.
That cheap food may be costing us more than we can afford, not just in dollars, but in our health and productivity.
Nearly 4 years ago, we left the American rat race and became regenerative farmers because
Nearly 6 years ago, we escaped the clutches of ultra-processed food.
in 2019, we stopped eating ultra-processed foods. We started eating a ketogenic diet and let go. It was hard, not going to lie, to get out of the clutches of a were for me addictive substances. And in researching for this particular podcast, we ran across some really cool stuff.
Welcome to the Duster Mud Podcast. I'm Rich.
And I'm Shelley.
On the Duster Mud Podcast, we like to talk about food, freedom, and farming. Today, we're going to focus this conversation on food. And Shelley brings up the fact that during our research for this particular podcast on ultra-processed foods, we ran across a very recent, less than a month old, in fact, lawsuit that we wanted to talk to you about.
You just said we like to talk about food. We're going to talk about food today, but I don't think it's food.
You think it's freedom, do you?
No, it's just none of them, because the stuff we're going to talk about isn't food. Well, right? I think that's the point we're just about to make. You know, what are we really talking about?
Okay.
Right?
A food-like
Right?
substance
Yes. Food-like substance.
marketed as food?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Cheap food-like substance. Okay, so what did you run across? Let's go.
Well, what I ran across was a civil action complaint that was filed on the 10th of December. Now comes plaintiff Bryce Martinez against defendants Kraft Heinz Company, Mondelez International, Post Holdings, the Coca-Cola Company, PepsiCo, General Mills, Nestle USA, Kellanova, WK Kellogg Company, Mars Incorporated, and ConAgra Brands, hereby known as defendants.
Okay, so today is January the 6th, 2025, and this lawsuit was submitted December the
10th, I believe.
10th of 2024. I heard about it in the news. It was a very brief snippet of this lawsuit of this kid, kind of a 16-year-old, that said, hey, I'm going to sue because your foods are making me sick. We heard about it, but there wasn't a lot out there, really.
No, it was a blip and then it disappeared, which is really interesting because as I read through some of the articles that are discussing this lawsuit, it's a class action.
Yeah, like this particular thing has never been done before.
Oh, it
It's
has.
Particular.
To the cigarette companies.
Right. The same but different because it was cigarette. Wait, no, maybe it is just all the same.
It's the same companies.
What we decided was, as we were reading through the 146-page lawsuit as submitted by the defendants, it really summed it up really well, how we feel and what we want to talk about in the introduction of the lawsuit that was submitted to all of these companies by the plaintiff, right? Is that right? I don't do legalese. Okay.
Yeah.
So
we're not, look, no, we are not all about lawsuits and suing people and all that kind of stuff. Most of the time we're like, no,
we're not sue happy people. However, sometimes people need to be stopped. And the only way to stop them from doing a thing is to take it into court and have the courts tell them you have to stop.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe in some of these instances, like with the cigarette companies back in the 1980s, 90s, all of that whole deal, when that happened, I would label that as a good thing. So sometimes our justice system needs to get involved.
Yeah. So look, we do have a little bit of information before we get there. If you want to talk about the history of these types of lawsuits,
yeah,
I think it would be it'd be beneficial.
Yeah.
So there was a class action. There were multiple class action lawsuits against the cigarette companies in the 1990s.
Okay.
They actually started way earlier than that. But in the 90s is really when things started actually changing.
I remember those. So I kind of, when we were watching some of that happen when we were young adults and what C-SPAN type things, we were getting to see what was really going on with these cigarette companies. It was all over the news back then, all over it.
Yeah. So the first one that really had effect was Engel versus Liggett Group in 1994, which is a Florida class action case on behalf of smokers. Initially won a $145 billion punitive damages award, but that was then overturned. However, individuals could file separate lawsuits based on the findings. And so that started happening. Individuals started suing the companies. And then what happened next, the next big case was the Master Settlement Agreement of 1998.
That was the biggie.
That was the biggie. That was attorneys general from 46 states, the District of Columbia, and 5 U.S. territories sued the 4 largest tobacco companies, Philip Morris, R.J. Reynolds, Brown and Williamson, and Lorillard. And that lawsuit, the outcome was the companies agreed to pay the states $206 billion over 25 years, billions more in
Perpetuity.
That's the word.
You're welcome.
They also agreed to restrict advertising, for example, no more cartoon characters like Joe Camel, and fund anti-smoking campaigns. This was the largest civil settlement in U.S. history. So that is the background behind, in my opinion at least, this current lawsuit that we're going to talk about today.
Well, basically, the states came and said, hey, you're making people sick and we're having to pay for it.
Yeah.
And that's not cool.
I'd be interested to know what 4 states didn't sue. We should look at that.
Oh, we should look that up.
That they're the tobacco producing states.
Oh, yeah. Could have been. We'll have to look that up. Hey, leave it in the comments. If you know who, just go ahead and leave it in the comments so that we can everybody can know who the 4 were.
Virginia, North Carolina.
I don't know.
We'll see.
Well, don't be doing that to those people. You better find out your information. Okay.
I'm making just
assumptions.
No, just predictions.
Oh, predictions.
Here's what I think.
Right. Okay. So what we thought, because this was really, really good, it really excited us to read how they had put this together. And the first 11 pages of the lawsuit are the introduction. And as we were reading it, it really laid out exactly what we were thinking, exactly how we were feeling, and the research that we've done. This right here backs it up I think legal documents are source documents, and we can just source right here. Of course, they've got all of their footnotes for their
Interestingly,
sources.
a lot of their footnotes are source documents that we've used in previous podcasts as well.
So we're really excited about what's happening here, because it seems to me, and I read it on the front page of this lawsuit, that the companies that are making these foods should be on notice. We are praying and hoping that there's a paradigm shift in the food industry, in the food environment in this country soon. Yeah. And this right here really kicks it off.
Yeah. And one of the things that we talked about was how much, and we've talked in previous podcasts, how much lobbying money there is with these big companies, and how difficult we've said change is going to be because there's so much money involved with it. And potentially the judicial system is a way to get around all of the money that is in the pockets of everybody from all of the different companies. It is a potential way to get around that, just like with the cigarette companies in the 1990s.
And the cigarette companies are still in business. Yeah. Nobody said you can't make your cigarettes. Right. They just said you can't market it. You can't do the things that you're doing in order to profit from the thing that you're making when we know it's making people sick. And so make your Cheetos, don't care. It's the presentation and how you're doing it.
Yep.
what you're doing.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Okay.
Which is?
So this right here. So we would like to take 10 minutes of your time and just read the introduction to this lawsuit and put it out there on record, just verbal on our podcast.
Verbatim. Yeah.
Verbatim. In the United States of America, one of the greatest threats to our health and the health of our children are the substances that dominate the shelves of our grocery stores, ultra-processed foods.
Ultra-processed foods are industrially produced edible substances that are imitations of food. They consist of former foods that have been fractioned into substances chemically modified, combined with additives, and then reassembled using industrial techniques such as molding, extrusion, and pressurization.
UPF are alien to prior human experience. They are inventions of modern industrial technology and contain little to no whole food. However, the prevalence of these foods exploded in the 1980s and have come to dominate the American food environment and the American diet. The issue is particularly pronounced in children, who now derive over 2/3 of their energy from UPF on average.
The explosion and ensuing rise in UPF in the 1980s was accompanied by an explosion in obesity, diabetes, and other life-changing chronic illnesses.
During this time frame, diseases that had been largely confined to elderly alcoholics, such as type 2 diabetes and fatty liver disease, emerged in children. Although such diseases were unheard of in children 40 years ago, they are now common, and treating them constitutes a large fraction of pediatric medical practice.
The human genome did not experience a catastrophic failure or paradigmatic shift during this time frame. Similarly, the explosion of these diseases cannot be explained by a massive nationwide failure of personal responsibility that began in the 1980s. Instead, something else happened in the 1980s.
In the 1980s, Big Tobacco took over the American food environment. Philip Morris bought major U.S. food companies, including General Foods and Kraft. R.J. Reynolds purchased Nabisco, Del Monte, Kentucky Fried Chicken, and others.
Collectively, Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds dominated the U.S. food system for decades. During this time, they used their cigarette playbook to fill our food environment with addictive substances that are aggressively marketed to children and minorities.
UPF formulation strategies were guided by the same tobacco company scientists and the same brain research on sensory perceptions, physiological psychology, and chemical senses that were used to increase the addictiveness of cigarettes.
Studies of how electrical messages are transmitted through the central nervous system are used to formulate UPF products. For example, scientists who supervised human electrode tests on nicotine's addictiveness at a secret Philip Morris laboratory in Germany regularly consulted with Kraft and General Foods on the development of UPF.
In doing so, big tobacco companies intentionally designed UPF to hack physiological structures of our brains.
These formulation strategies were quickly adopted throughout the UPF industry with the goal of driving consumption and defendants' profits at all costs. The same MRI machines used by scientific researchers to study potential cures for addiction are used by UPF companies to engineer their products to be ever more addictive.
At the same time, Big Tobacco repurposed marketing strategies designed to sell cigarettes to children and minorities and aggressively marketed UPF to these groups. As a Philip Morris executive boasted at a UPF industry conference, quote, "We've decided to focus our marketing on kids where we know our strength is the greatest," unquote.
The rest of the UPF industry quickly followed suit, taking a very well-evolved marketing strategy to sell things that make people sick and applying it from one substance, cigarettes, to another, UPF. The UPF industry now spends about $2 billion each year marketing UPF to children.
These strategies have had their intended effect. UPFs meet all the scientific criteria that were used to determine that tobacco products are addictive. Like industrial tobacco products, UPFs trigger compulsive use, have psychoactive effects, are highly reinforcing, and trigger strong urges and cravings.
Meanwhile, sales have surged. UPFs have displaced traditional foods and now constitute the vast majority of children's diets.
While the multinational UPF companies get richer, Americans get sicker.
We are all living with the devastating consequences of defendants' actions. The United States is beset by concurrent epidemics of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and other conditions. Obesity has doubled among adults and tripled among children. The number of Americans with type 2 diabetes has tripled since 1980. Rates of colorectal cancer have doubled in younger adults.
For the first time ever, type 2 diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease emerged in adolescence around the turn of the millennium. The rates of these diseases in children are now surging, with rates of both doubling in recent years. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is now as common in children as asthma.
Scores of high-quality human studies have demonstrated that UPF significantly increase the risks of obesity, type 2 diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, cancers, cardiovascular disease, cerebrovascular disease, irritable bowel syndrome, dementia, mental health outcomes, mortality, and other serious chronic illnesses.
However, these same studies demonstrate that UPF increase these risks independently of their nutritional profiles. Even after adjustment for the fat, sugar, salt, carbohydrates, and other nutrient profiles, UPF still cause significant health risks.
In other words, UPF are dangerous, not only because they are designed to hack our physiological nervous system and are aggressively marketed to children. The risks caused by UPF cannot be avoided simply by choosing healthier UPF with less fat, sugar, salt, carbohydrates, or different nutrient profiles. Likewise, UPF does not increase the risk of other conditions simply because it causes obesity.
Instead, UPF increase the risks of disease because they are ultra-processed, not because of how many grams of certain nutrients they contain or how much weight gain they cause. Therefore, even attempts to eat healthfully are undermined by the ultra-processed nature of UPF. One cannot evade the risks caused by UPF simply by selecting UPF with lower calories, fat, salt, sugar, carbohydrates, or other nutrients.
The UPF industry is well aware of the harms they are causing and has known it for decades, but they continue to inflict massive harm on society in a reckless pursuit of profits.
In April of 1999, the CEOs of America's largest UPF companies attended a secret meeting in Minneapolis to discuss the devastating public health consequences of UPF and their conduct. At the meeting, a Kraft executive told the other CEOs in attendance that obesity was reaching epidemic proportions, especially among children who were, quote, at a higher risk of developing chronic diseases such as diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, and cancer, unquote.
This same executive informed the others that their companies were collectively driving this, costing the U.S. upwards of $100 billion a year and inflicting a toll on public health rivaling that of tobacco.
He then implored the attendees to change their ways before this became a crisis for the UPF industry, asking rhetorically, quote, with all this, can the trial lawyers be far behind, unquote?
But nothing changed as a result of that meeting, and the UPF industry has carried on, inflicting massive social harm on our health and our children for the last 25 years.
Plaintiff Bryce Martinez is one of many casualties of defendants' predatory profiteering. Defendants targeted plaintiff with marketing campaigns intended to increase his consumption of their UPF. which defendants engineered to have addictive qualities.
Due to defendant's conduct, plaintiff regularly, frequently, and chronically ingested their UPF, which caused him to contract type 2 diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease at the age of 16. Plaintiff is now suffering from these devastating diseases and will continue to suffer for the rest of his life.
Plaintiff brings this action to recover the damages defendants have inflicted upon him, as well as all additional damages available under applicable law.
So that was the opening to this lawsuit that was filed. That was about 8 pages of the 100, almost 150 pages of the lawsuit.
Right.
The rest of the lawsuit contains the details, backing up, supporting the allegations, if you will, that they introduced in the introduction.
The science, with the MRIs, all of the studies with the mice and what happens in the brain and the chemical stuff, it's all detailed in the lawsuit.
Yeah, I'll leave a link to this lawsuit so you can read the entire thing yourself. If you have the time, I know it's almost 150 pages, but it is really fascinating the way that they have put together all of the stuff that a lot of us have been saying about ultra-processed foods. And Casey and Callie Means have been talking about recently about the tobacco companies and making the foods addictive on purpose, and all of these things that we've been saying are wrapped up really nicely. I understand 150 pages isn't short, but it is wrapped up really nicely in one space and is meant to contain all of it.
Yeah. It's the health crisis, to me, when you talk about adults and type 2 diabetes and fatty liver disease and choices that adults make, that we all want to go to personal responsibility. But whenever you start adding in the kids, and the kids just want the thing, and we remember going to the grocery store with our parents, you want the thing that looks the coolest with the toy inside.
Yeah.
You know?
Marketed to children. It's got cartoon characters. It's got toys inside. It's got bright colors. It's got all of the things that cause children to demand it.
Right. No matter what is on the inside of the box, as far as the food is concerned, they want Tony the Tiger. They want the Fruit Loops Toucan Sam. We wanted the thing because it was fun. We enjoyed the the commercial, which was a cartoon, the Lucky Charms characters. They've done a really, really good marketing job, and then put them right down there, at the 4-foot level, so the kids can see them and throw them in the buggy. They really, and of course I'm going after the cereal right this second, because we all remember this, our age people, that was kind of the fun thing to do at the grocery store.
I'll draw you back to, it's not just cereal and it's not just kids. I'm with you that I think the marketing to children holds a special place of evil.
Yeah, you put it well.
But the addictiveness and marketing even to adults is out there as well.
Mm-hmm.
The adults are addicted.
Highly addicted. Hey, whenever we started, when you said, hey, I want to go keto, and we started on our quest towards a different type of eating, that was hard.
Just as we started researching it, it was like, I don't know about
that's too restrictive, I
don't know about this.
That's too everything. We were addicted.
Yeah.
Highly to processed foods,
they're designed to cause that. It's not like we were faulty. We didn't have, it wasn't like our brains somehow weren't working right.
Mm-hmm.
Our brains and bodies were working perfectly. And the scientists behind the ultra processed foods know exactly what that is and how it works, and take advantage of that to addict us all.
So we're all addicted. What can we do? You know, what can we do? Well, there are things that we can do. There are steps that we can take in order to look after ourselves and our children. Number one thing is to understand that this is happening. It's now out there in the open. It is, people are talking about it. There's an awakening, I feel like, that is about to happen. If it hasn't happened already, it's coming to this is bad stuff. This is not the kind of stuff that you want to put in front of your 2-year-old or your 6-month-old or your 7-year-old or yourself for that matter. But what can we do? There are steps that we can take in our own lives to mitigate whatever it is the former tobacco companies want to do to us.
To me, if you just do the opposite, like it takes what maybe used to be food and turns it into a food-like substance. Do the opposite of that. Stop processing it. Stop ingesting food-like substances.
Mm-hmm.
Go for whole foods.
Mm-hmm.
Select something that isn't ultra-processed.
Right.
Something that one of the probably easiest ways to determine that we've seen to determine if a food is ultra processed is, does it contain something that isn't in a normal household kitchen?
Yeah.
Normal household kitchens have heat, they have salt, right? Like there are things that normal people
occurring
do
in nature, spices.
Yeah, but like we process food, we cook it, we add chemicals to it like salt,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or elements, whatever you want to say. Like we do things to food, and we process it, we cut it up, we change its form, right? Like we take
They
milk.
call it minimally processed.
Yeah, we take milk and we make it into cheese. That is processing milk.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But it is minimally processed using techniques and tools and ingredients that you would find in a normal kitchen. Right? Like if it's not that.
If it says hydrolyzed.
Well, if it's not that,
yeah.
Then don't consume it. Don't eat it. And okay.
Problem solved.
Because there are so many different diets out there that have that focus on different things. Like most of you know, we focus on a ketogenic diet, which is a high fat, moderate protein, low carbohydrate diet.
Mm-hmm.
There are other diets out there that are not that aren't causing all of these illnesses and sicknesses and diseases.
Yep. Atkins, carnivore, Whole30. The diets have been around for a long time. Yeah. Specific recipes on what you should eat. But typically...
Or even specific ethnic diets. Like typically an Asian diet is high in salt.
Sure.
A Hispanic diet is high in carbohydrates. The Mediterranean diet is high in fats.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look historically, none of those diets, although vastly different, led to the health crisis that we're having right now, that ultra-processed foods have led to. So I go back to, although we espouse and really love the ketogenic diet, it's not the only way. And it's not the only way out of ultra-processed foods.
Right.
Eat real foods. Eat whole foods.
Yeah.
Eat real foods. Go back to what your ancestors in the 1900s ate.
Yeah. Food. Real food.
Back when all of these diseases were associated with elderly alcoholics.
Right. Well, one of the things that, many of you have heard this, I'm sure, but a technique is shop the grocery store outside, the perimeter of the grocery store. Out on if you think about it, you've got what on the perimeter? You have your vegetables, your dairy, meat. What else is on the edges? Or eggs, proteins are typically on. Why? Because most of them require refrigeration, right? So,
Yeah.
well, they do. They require some sort of preservation method on the where if I was going to have a store, I need to put my freezers against the wall because that's where the electricity's coming.
Yeah. Joel talked about it, if you remember, when on one of his podcasts, Joel Salatin was talking about real food. And one of the things that he said was that worms will eat it. If it's a real food, worms will eat it. Another way to know is if it's a real food, it will rot.
Yes. And the fact that the majority of the food that is on the inside in the jungle down all of those aisles at the grocery store or the big box store, Walmart, call it what you want, all those aisles are filled with things that actually are not food. They used to be, they used to be something, and they have been turned into a food-like substance. What are the downstream effects on population going to be another 25 years from now?
Yeah.
When the kids who are now having fatty liver disease and type 2 diabetes and all of the litany of other things that are wrong with them are then adults, and fertility issues and the whole population, the problems, we don't even know all of them yet that are going to come from these food companies.
Yeah. Yeah. The disease and illness, if we don't do something to reverse it, if we don't do something to turn it around, there are going to be definite long-lasting implications. Yeah.
Yeah. But the fact is, we have a society that is highly addicted to things that are right in front of them and very cheap. And unless someone does something to course correct this, we're in a world, a whole world of hurt. And the best thing that we can do is continue to beat the drum about it and encourage people to eat whole, real food, cook your own food if you can, and get with somebody else who also wants to stop eating ultra processed foods and start eating real foods. Get together, leave comments in our comment section in this community, because we all like whole food. We mention a lot of times local food, but Costco and Walmart also have whole food.
That's true.
It is available to us.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true.
Our nation has got some serious problems. We're in debt up to our eyeballs. Our healthcare costs right now are in the trillions of dollars. And more than half or nearly half of those costs are diet-related, metabolic, chronic diseases.
Yeah. We were listening to a doctor the other day talking about chronic disease and how that didn't used to be a thing. It used to be a disease was something to be cured, and now a disease is something to be managed. They've become chronic, and the cost of a chronic disease is enormous, especially if that disease manifests itself in children. So a disease like type 2 diabetes, if it occurs in a child, they are then without any kind of dietary intervention. If they continue to just eat the same ultra processed food, standard American diet, that child is now a healthcare cost for the rest of their life.
And if they do decide to do something and get out of the healthcare system and use food as a way to go into remission for type 2 diabetes, they're metabolically still broken for the rest of their lives. And that's what the 16-year-old kid is saying. He's metabolically broken. Now he can go into remission and he can do things in order to help his system function properly. But the fact is, he's he's living with that for the rest of his life.
Right. It has to do with his body and carbohydrates. His body now cannot handle carbohydrates.
Right.
That's what happens with type 2 diabetes. So with diet, you can limit the carbohydrates, like a ketogenic diet. You can limit the carbohydrates, and studies are finding and doctors are finding that the ketogenic diet is a great way of putting type 2 diabetes into remission, reversal, all of these things. They call it cured. But this isn't one where you can cheat on the diet. It has to become just a way of eating.
Right.
Like, I mean, carnivores in the wild, take a lion, a tiger, they have a carnivorous diet. That's not meaning diet in the sense that they are restricting what they eat. That just is what they eat. That is their diet. Herbivores have a diet of plants. It's not, they're not on a diet to lose weight, right?
Yeah.
That is just what they eat. And for someone with type 2 diabetes to control that disease with diet, you have to cut out the carbohydrates. It's not I'm on a weight loss diet. It just has to become, this is how I now eat. I eat a diet that does not include carbohydrates.
Yeah. For the rest of their lives.
Correct. Because their metabolic system is broken, in this case, by the time he was 16, from consumption of ultra-processed foods, is what the case is alleging.
Right. Woo-wee. Huh.
Yeah. What I see in this is potential. I really do. In the same way that the cigarette companies, I remember we had just joined the Air Force, and there were so many other things that we were thinking about at the time. But I remember it happening. And initially I remember thinking, there's no way that they're going to make the cigarette companies stop doing anything.
Right.
Okay, so you sue them, whatever. And then, that lawsuit was overturned, and it was like, see,
right,
I told you.
Yeah.
But then the next year comes the lawsuit, and then the punitive damages, and we have to get rid of the cartoon characters, and we have to cut the advertisements off of TV. Like, things actually did start changing. And in this case, I think that there's potential.
Absolutely.
There's potential that things start changing. Put a warning label on it. May cause type 2 diabetes, obesity, heart disease, cancers, like all of the things that we listed off. Put a warning label on it, and which we talked about last podcast.
Yeah.
Put a warning label on these food-like substances, ultra-processed foods that we know are causing all of these things. Put a label on them. Make them put a label on them. Stop the marketing to children.
And we stop trusting the food industry, the ultra-processed food industry. I'm sorry. Me as a parent, I personally, you start putting those warning labels on there. Nobody's pouring rum for their 7-year-old, like we know better than that. Yep. But as a parent, you go to the grocery store, you just want your kids to be happy. You're getting them some fun food. You don't know what it's doing, but now it's being uncovered. We now know what it's doing.
Well, 3/4 of adults, if the ultra-processed food, if the label has healthy or organic on it, they believe that it's better for them.
And it isn't any different.
It's still just an ultra-processed food, just like the rest of them. Food-like substance.
With so many addictive properties. Yeah. Anyway, things are going to change. 2025, 26, I think the food industry is going to change. There is a good food industry out there, and it's called whole food, and farmers who are growing real food.
Yeah.
There are really good food growers out there. There is good food, but the food that is coming out of these multinational factories. Nope.
That's why we're doing what we are doing. We decided in 2019, we're not going to eat this stuff anymore. We're going to eat real food. We're going to eat whole food. And we're going to do that via a ketogenic lifestyle. By 2021, we owned a farm and we were growing our own food. It was that important to us. And I think that it just takes a mindset shift to understand, to realize, to believe even that food matters. A calorie isn't just a calorie. There is so much difference between a calorie of grass-fed ground beef and a calorie of soda.
Mm,
A
yeah.
calorie is not just a calorie. It's just not when
Right.
it comes to nutrition, when it comes to our health. It is a unit of measure, like I got that. But what it does in our body, that thing that is being represented by the number of a calorie, is so different. And the choices we make have such an impact on our health.
It is January. It is a new year. And we, especially from me, we encourage you to go out, get yourself a pound of ground beef, get some lettuce, make yourself a salad, and sit down and eat real whole food. Thank you guys for joining us again at the Dust or Mud podcast. And until next time, bye, y'all.
Bye.